Hello, my name is Michael Harris, and I'm currently the winemaker at Chalet Debonnaire Vineyards in Madison, Ohio. I've been asked to talk to you today about food and wine pairing. And before I get going, I'd like to thank Bin 36 here in Chicago for allowing us to use this facility to record and talk to you about pairing food and wine. Now, pairing food and wine is intimidating for people. It can be uncomfortable, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of how food and wine pairing came to be. In many of the old world cultures, wine has a long history as a staple at the dinner table. Local cuisine was paired with local wines. So in the very beginning, there really wasn't any protocol for pairing food and wine. The local wine, which was close, would be paired with the local culinary traditions. Many pairings, because of that, are considered classics today, so they've carried over and continued as a tradition of food and wine pairings, merely because of, again, the proximity of local wine with local food. Only in recent years has the phenomenon of food and wine pairings become popular. And you'll see today food publications, wine publications as well, wine magazines, very focused on food and wine pairings. And it began in the United States, I'd say around the 1980s, when winemakers became much more focused on what people were eating with the wines that they were making. Winemakers even went as far as to start on the back of their labels putting food and wine pairings and recipes to help accommodate people, again, that may have been a little bit uncomfortable, but really it began with the awareness that wine was just more than something to drink by itself and for intoxication purposes. People wanted to enjoy wine with food, and that's where the modern day food and wine pairing phenomenon started. Wines typically are selected based on instinct, mood of the meal, how somebody might be feeling, a familiarity with a certain wine that they've had in the past. Because of the subjective nature of food and wine pairings, there's really no wrong food and wine pairing. Whatever feels good and tastes good and comfortable as you're dining is what is right and will taste perfect with your meal. And food and wine pairing merely is a process of enhancing a dining experience with food paired with the wine, and as we'll talk a little bit more about, the wine paired with the food. So it's what your objective is and what will take kind of precedent over the other, what you want to use to complement the other. So I'll talk a little bit about pairing wines, whites and reds, some characteristics of whites and reds, different varietals and what they traditionally pair with, details of ingredients, spices and herbs that go well with wines, and then using wine in cooking. And again, what spices might complement wine as you're cooking a meal. I'm going to start off with certain components. There's three components when matching food and pairing with wine. The first one's very important. I'm going to talk about weight. Now I'm going to talk about weight with as it pertains to food and weight as it pertains to wine. Wine weight is known as body. If you think of body of wine, think of milk. Think of skim milk, whole milk, and cream. Wine is described as light, medium, or full bodied. So skim milk would be a light-bodied, milk would be medium, and cream would be a full-bodied wine. And I'm trying to relate that as to the weight and the feel when you drink the different skim milk, regular milk, and cream. It's the weight that you feel on your mouth. That's the same perception that you get from a light, medium, or full-bodied wine. So matching the weight of the wine to the weight of the food is the first component. And the weight of the wine is derived from the alcohol that's in the wine. The higher the alcohol, the higher, the fuller the body, the higher viscosity, and the viscosity is the weight of the wine. Now we're going to match that to food, and there's an old historical adage, red wines with red meat, white wines with white meat. And that holds true. Again, derived, I'm sure, in old world European countries that red wine was consumed with red meat and hearty stews. Red meat is considered heavy and hearty, and red wines typically pair well with red meats. White wines are the same. Light fish, light meat, lean meat pair well with lighter wines. Now, again, it's very subjective, and that's not the sole rule, but it's a place to begin when matching food and wine. And we'll talk a little bit too about the intensity of the flavors as well. Now, the second component is, what is the focus of the pairing? And I referred to this a few moments ago. You want to focus on the food, so you're going to pair the wine to complement the food. There are restaurants that have wine dinners that begin with the focus is the wine, and the chef is put at task to come up with a menu that complements the wine. So it's the focus of a dinner party. If you want to really focus on your cooking skills, you're going to find a wine that will complement that. And then the third thing, the component that I want to talk about, is complementing and contrasting flavors and textures of the food and the wine. Now, if you want to complement, you're going to try to find similar food weights, flavors, and textures. As the wine, you're going to try to pair that with similar food, wine flavors and textures. There's one adage known as power to power. So you're trying to match the same powers, the same flavors and textures. Or you can contrast the food and the wine, so that you're getting two distinct different flavors. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about characteristics of the wine. Again, it can be said that taste is subjective, but there are quantifiable characteristics that can be perceived and measured when we're drinking wine. There's acidity, there's sweetness, bitterness, and alcohol content, which are derived from the sensory glands when we taste and consume wine. In wine, the three that we are aware of are bitter, sweet, and sour. Now, bitter in wine comes through the tannins, and tannins are derived from the fermentation process from the contact of skins and seeds and stems from the grapes. Sweet is the residual sugar that remains in the wine. So wine during fermentation takes alcohol, the sugar, and converts it to alcohol. A winemaker's style will dictate how dry the wine will be and how much sugar that the winemaker will leave in the wine. The residual sugar then is the sugar, or the percentage of sugar that is left in the wine when the fermentation is complete. And then sour is acidity. And I'll be talking about these three concepts a little bit more in depth. And again, their relation to how they affect the food that you'll be pairing that wine with. So let's talk about acidity, which is a key component because of the complex ways that it just heightens the perception of the flavors. In dishes that are fatty, oily, or rich, acidity cuts through those food qualities. And by cutting through, it means it softens those qualities. And it stands out and it contrasts against those food qualities. Try to match the acidity of the wine to that of the food, or the wine becomes really flabby and blank and very weak. Next, on the sweetness, again, it's determined by the sugar that remains, is the sugar that's in the wine. When we talk about the sweetness, we talk about dry, off-dry, semi-dry, or very sweet, which is dessert sweet wine. When you pair sweet wines with foods, the wine needs to be sweeter than the dish which you're preparing and that you're serving. And the bitterness of the wine, or also the astringency, again is derived from tannins. Now, bitterness is something that you can actually taste. The tongue has different areas that pick up sweetness and acidity and bitterness. But tannins, they add a gritty or a chalky texture. But the tannins also react with proteins, such as fat in a steak and meat, and then it appears softer. Foods which are high in protein, like red meats, hard cheeses, they pair well with tannic wines. And alcohol, the higher the alcohol content, the perception is a hotter feel in the back of your mouth. So alcohol, again, higher alcohol, higher body weight, higher viscosity, fuller body.